For years, they called him a ghost, a man who walked through walls, who breathed the same air as soldiers, and disappeared before they could turn around. A man so feared that when his name was whispered in the streets of Guadalajara, people changed the subject and looked over their shoulders. Law enforcement on 2 continents hunted him. The United States government put $15 million on his head, and still, he vanished, again and again, like smoke. His name was Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes, but the world knew him as El Mencho, and on February 22, 2026, his ghost finally had nowhere left to hide. To understand how a man becomes untouchable, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a dirt-poor village in Michoacán, Mexico, where a boy named Nemesio grew avocados and dropped out of school before he was a teenager. Back to a time when nobody knew his name and nobody was looking for him. He crossed into the United States illegally in the 1980s, one of millions making that desperate journey north. But Nemesio had ambition that wouldn't sit still. He got caught up in drug trafficking. U.S. authorities convicted him of heroin trafficking in the mid-1990s. He served his sentence, and then he went back to Mexico. That should have been the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Back in Mexico, Nemesio moved fast and climbed faster. He joined the ranks of the Mencho cartel, working under a powerful Sinaloa boss. He learned the business from the inside, how to move product, how to manage money, how to kill, and he was exceptional at all 3. Then in 2010, everything shifted. His boss died. The Mencho cartel fractured. In the chaos, 2 factions emerged, and Nemesio chose a side. His side won, and from the wreckage of that war, he built something new, something that would grow into one of the most powerful and terrifying criminal organizations Mexico had ever seen. He called it the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. Within a few years, the CJNG was everywhere. It expanded with military speed across Mexico, absorbing territory, eliminating rivals, and flooding the United States with cocaine, methamphetamine, and eventually fentanyl, the drug that would claim hundreds of thousands of American lives. El Mencho wasn't just a trafficker, he was a strategist. He armed his people like soldiers. He deployed drones as weapons. He didn't just fight rival cartels. He attacked the Mexican government itself. In May of 2015, the CJNG shot down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. 9 soldiers were killed. El Mencho had drawn a line in the blood-soaked dirt. He was telling the government, "We are at war, and we are not afraid of you." Most cartel bosses tried to stay out of sight. El Mencho seemed to want the world to know what he was capable of. And yet, nobody could find him. For over a decade, El Mencho became one of the most wanted men alive. The U.S. indicted him in 2014 on charges of drug trafficking and conspiracy. The DEA tracked his finances. Intelligence agencies watched his family. His son, his brothers, his son-in-law. One by one, they were arrested. In September 2024, his son Ruben, known as El Menchito, was sentenced to life in prison in the United States. In December 2022, his brother Antonio, El Tony Montana, was captured. In February 2025, another brother, Abraham, was recaptured for money laundering. In November 2024, his own son-in-law was arrested in California, a man who had literally faked his death to escape justice, with El Mencho's help. The circle around him was shrinking. Every person who knew him, every person who had shared a table or a phone call with him, was a thread being pulled. But El Mencho himself? He was still out there. There were rumors he was sick. Reports circulated that he suffered from kidney disease, that he had built a private hospital in a remote village just to treat himself, that he hadn't been seen in public in years. Some whispered he was already dead. Authorities pushed back, and there was no reliable evidence of death, they said. He was still out there. In the shadowy world of intelligence, patience is a weapon, and the men and women hunting El Mencho had been patient for a very long time. In the days before February 22, 2026, something changed. Military intelligence had been tracking the movements of a trusted associate, someone connected to a romantic partner of El Mencho. Surveillance data gathered on February 20th pointed to a location, a place where El Mencho was believed to be present. The location, Tapalpa, a small mountain town about 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara, nestled in the hills of Jalisco. The operation was planned with extraordinary precision. The Mexican army took the lead. The National Guard provided support. The Mexican Air Force was on standby, and crucially, a U.S. military-led intelligence task force, the Joint Interagency Task Force Counter-Cartel, had provided what officials called a targeting package. Years of American intelligence, years of surveillance, and signals and human sources had been folded into a single operational plan. On the morning of February 22nd, the soldiers moved in. It was not quiet. As troops closed in on the location, gunfire erupted. The CJNG fighters protecting El Mencho were not there to surrender. They were there to die for him or kill for him, whichever came first. 8 cartel members were killed in the operation. Armored vehicles were seized, rocket launchers, weapons that belonged on a battlefield, not a mountain town. And then they found him, El Mencho, the ghost. The most wanted man in Mexico and the United States was found wounded. Alive, but barely. 2 of his bodyguards were wounded beside him. A soldier had also been hurt in the firefight. The military called for a helicopter. El Mencho would be airlifted to a medical facility in Guadalajara. The world was going to know his face in handcuffs, but the story wasn't finished yet. El Mencho never made it to Guadalajara. He died during the flight. The man who had evaded governments for 15 years, who had built a criminal empire from nothing, who had shot down helicopters and sent thousands of kilograms of fentanyl across the border. He died in the sky over Jalisco, the state he had turned into his personal kingdom. Mexican Defense Secretary Ricardo Trevilla Trejo confirmed it. 2 other cartel members died alongside him. The ghost was gone. But even in death, El Mencho sent a message. Within hours, the CJNG unleashed a wave of violence across Mexico that the country had not seen since the capture of El Chapo. Cartel members hijacked vehicles and set them on fire. Roads were blocked in nearly a dozen states. Shootouts erupted. The city of Guadalajara, one of Mexico's largest, turned into a ghost town as residents locked their doors. Puerto Vallarta's international airport suspended most flights. Long-distance buses stopped running. At least 85 cartel roadblocks were recorded in a single day. More than 70 people were arrested across 7 states. At least 25 National Guard members were killed in the days that followed. His right-hand man, a figure known as El Tuli, allegedly organized the retaliatory attacks and offered a bounty of $1,000 for the killing of each soldier involved in the operation. El Mencho was dead. His organization was making sure everyone felt the grief. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum praised her security forces. The U.S. State Department, which had offered $15 million for El Mencho's capture, acknowledged the joint intelligence operation that made it possible. Analysts called it the most significant elimination of a cartel leader since Pablo Escobar was gunned down in Medellin in 1993. But in the mountains of Jalisco, in the ash of burned vehicles, in the silence of a city too scared to go outside, the victory felt complicated. Because the CJNG did not die with El Mencho. The fentanyl pipelines did not close. The corruption did not vanish. The poverty that feeds criminal recruitment did not disappear. El Mencho spent 60 years on this earth, the first of them picking avocados, the last of them hiding in the hills. He was a product of broken systems, and he built a machine that exploited those same systems for billions of dollars and thousands of lives. The ghost is dead.